Hello guys, so I'm very often asked about INFJ narcissists or the relationship between INFJs and narcissism. It seems to be a question that keeps recurring. CL Strife mentioned it as a possible question to address. She even seems aware that this is a question that recurs, not just on her part, but on the part of other people. The recurrence in itself is interesting and says something about the broader way in which INFJs are perceived. So in this video, I want to maybe dispel some myths or bring a little bit more complexity in this whole picture of narcissism and the INFJ mode of behavior, mode of life, and what it means to be unhealthy and as an INFJ, and how does that overlap possibly with narcissism. So first of all, there's something that we need to do, which is to try to kind of pin down a little better what narcissism is, right? Because it's obviously very trendy these days to call anyone who exhibits certain forms of toxicity or certain forms of manipulation a narcissist. And from a psychological perspective and from a psychoanalytic perspective, this can be kind of slippery terrain, you know, and you need to keep this in mind. So first of all, everybody in the world has a narcissistic side, narcissistic capital, right? We all have narcissistic capital, and it's important that we do. Narcissism at the primary level is just the libido investment into the ego. It's important to have, for a balanced individual, to have part of their libido invested into themselves. When you build your sense of self, when you build your motivations, when you reflect on yourself, when you think about your place in the world, that's also a form of narcissism. It's just that your libido, like your psychic energy, is kind of turning back on yourself. The other form of libido investment is libido investment into objects and subjects. So you could call this relational investment, when like the movement of libido is from you to the external world. So someone who is completely focused on themselves and invests only energy back into themselves, like has, if you like, is pathological due to certainly way too intense and way too pervasive narcissistic investment. But someone who doesn't have any of that and is entirely focused on objects and relations in the world is also pathological. So really a lot of disorders, this is something that can be tricky for people to understand, but a lot of personality disorders are linked to a particular phases in childhood where basic primary narcissism was not developed enough, so that the narcissistic capital is actually insufficient, leading the person later in life to display patterns of behavior that are basically a sense of constantly seeking narcissistic supply so that they can fill that hole in themselves, you know. So basically a lot of people who display traits of narcissism actually have quite a weak self, a weak ego, and they're trying to kind of reassure themselves, fill it, but it can never be completely filled, so they have to kind of persist in their mode of behavior. So these people are, you know, in a sense, they have a weak self, and that's what makes them narcissistic, right? The relationship is focused on the self, and to the extent that there are relational relationships, relational libido investments, it is done for the purpose of actually being brought back to the self. That's how you can end up with particular cases of narcissistic manipulation, right? But people who are narcissists are not always manipulative. It's something that you have to keep in mind. They will come across very self-centered, they will come across unempathetic, they will come across unfeeling, sometimes harsh, and they will expect to be treated like they're exceptional people. That is true of a narcissist in that sense, and it certainly can be pathological if it's too extreme. If it's not pathological because it's not too extreme, these people can have friends, and sure, they'll have moments when people will see them as selfish and lacking in empathy, but again, it depends on the intensity of the traits. It's only past a certain level of influence over the personality and friendships and relationships that we can talk about having a narcissistic personality disorder. But even narcissistic personality disorder is not always about manipulation. It's just that people are so self-centered and megalomaniac that people try to avoid them. So it's only a subcategory of people who have narcissistic personality disorder that are also manipulative. They resort to manipulation, and in fact, there seems to be a correlation between how weak your ego is and how likely it is that you're going to resort to manipulation to fill it up, fill the gaps. And the gaps will always reappear and they'll have to be filled up. And the weaker the ego actually is underneath, the more likely the narcissist will resort to manipulation. There are also narcissists who generally have a very strong ego, and these will tend not to be manipulative because they just love themselves in a genuine way. They don't need to manipulate others to be reassured of that. So now that I've said all this, where do we place the INFJ in this? Well, being INFJ and being narcissistic is a correlation that is neither stronger nor weaker than being INFJ, being any other type and being narcissistic. We're talking about psychopathology, and there is no relationship that we are aware of between psychopathology and a particular type. There is no verified, empirically proven relationship between a particular psychopathology and any particular type, right? So it seems that psychopathology has no preference, right, in regard to particular types. That being said, we can probably still say that if we look at our three subtypes of INFJ, the adaptive submissive, the solipsistic, and the liberated, narcissism, retreat into the self, very strong, possibly often excessive libido investment in the ego. Well, that sounds a lot like something that will appear sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in the solipsistic INFJ. Right? The traits of narcissism, insofar as they appear in INFJ, are most likely and most often going to appear in the solipsistic INFJ for obvious reasons. The adaptive submissive INFJ is exposed to certain psychopathologies, but it's not this one. If you like, I can explore some of those psychopathologies, or at least the risk, in other videos. Here we'll be talking more about hysteria, about dependence, about passive aggression, possibly about avoidance. So again, we can discuss that in a later video if you like, but narcissism probably most correlated with solipsists. Now, for you solipsists, don't forget that I'm not saying that you're all narcissists, okay? I'm saying that we're talking about a very small number of INFJs, but it's very likely that these INFJs are solipsists besides being narcissistic. As regards whether INFJs will have the power to be particularly efficient narcissists if they're malignant, that is to say if they're of the manipulative kind, it seems clear because INFJs are peculiarly able to look into and stare into people's souls, so they tend to have an understanding of how people work. So if you take empathy out of the picture and people start thinking about others as means to ends, it's easy to see that an INFJ will be at an advantage to know how to manipulate people, because not all manipulators are equally effective. Some manipulators are very obvious, that's how we can learn to avoid them quickly. Others are more insidious, and probably INFJs are very efficient in that manner, unfortunately. Okay, let me know in the comments what you thought. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on the INFJ if you want to explore more on that very fascinating type. My latest book is called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World, on how to be an INFJ in the world today, a world that is often seen to be very hostile. If you love the book but haven't dropped a review, please consider it. Helps with the referencing, okay? And it explores more in detail the different subtypes. It's worth looking into. The first link is to that book. Now I have also the prequel to the Infinite Soul, which is the Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality, which is more an in-depth study of the INFJ mind and how it manifests existentially. So if you want to go very in-depth about INFJ consciousness, what it feels like to be an INFJ, this is also the book to get. The two books, of course, go very well together. And as always, you know that my Patreon page is the lifeblood of my channel. I keep it going thanks to your support. From anywhere from $3.50 a month, you can really contribute to helping keep this channel going so I can continue producing quality content. You can interact with me there. You can suggest videos, topics for me to cover, and you get access to bonus content, including my recently released first in-depth video where I discuss INFJ shame and guilt. So if you're interested, the link is down there. Okay, see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.